Hey, this is Tim Ellis, and I am back with another video talking about one of my paintings from my artist series. If you're not familiar with it, I painted a series of many artists that I felt were incredibly influential in my own art, as well as culture at large, and also who really helped shape what we have in the art world today. So today I am talking about, this way, Auguste Rodin. And Auguste Rodin was a French sculptor and really influential on me in my early work. If you're not aware, I started most of my work doing clay figure sculpture and a lot of life-size work and a lot of busts. So Rodin, who did a lot of that same sort of thing, really inspired me with his rawness, his looseness, a lot of times sculpting maybe only what's necessary to really convey the power of the individual or the pose, and really kind of shaped me as a young artist to a degree. So anyway, I'm going to show you this piece a little closer up. I'm going to bring it closer to the camera because this is one of the ones that I painted using some paint that actually has different metal in it. And you'll notice that the blues and the golds kind of illuminate depending on the angle that I'm holding it. And it's very hard to show this without it literally being in the room with you, but I found this kind of works. I did this with my Salvador Dali, so my volume might go out a little bit because I'm going to step away from the camera, but take a look at this, and then I'll show you just a really good photograph of it in the slideshow that I'm going to show you next. So here we go. Okay, so just for reference, you can see that this is a big painting. So this is 4 feet tall. I'm going to bring it closer here. All right, so if you look, as I'm turning these blues, the blues really start to illuminate a lot. I'm trying to get it central for you. And you're also seeing it in some of these reds right here. Sorry, my camera's flipped for me. So as I rotate it, notice it really illuminates and parts of this kind of come to life. And to me, I find that incredibly exciting. What'll happen is throughout the day, the light will hit this painting differently and it'll just become a completely different painting. It's almost like it kind of comes alive. I think I have some of this also in the actual signature. Not seeing that as much, but you can see some of the metallics here and in the signature as well. All right, let's put this guy back. And take a closer look. All right, a little bit of a crazy way to view it, but I think that kind of works. All right, and now that he's been seen, I'm going to make this a little bit more central. All right, let's click over to the slideshow, and we'll talk a little bit about his work and why I think he's so important. So here we go. Okay, so here's a little bit of a better image of my painting, and you can see some of that metallic, those metallic elements kind of peeking through. This is not the photograph that I used to paint this, and when I'm choosing the photo that I'm going to use to paint the artist, I really like to leave a lot of imaginative elements up to myself as I'm creating the color palette. I always work from black and white images so that the colors are completely created by me. And I also really spend a lot of time choosing a pose that I think just shows a lot about them and who they are and kind of what's going on internally with them as well. You can see I love this photo of him actually on the left with his hat and everything and this wild beard, but he has a lot of, he looks very noble in a lot of the photos of him that you'll see. So from 1840 to 1917, so this is an artist mainly working in the era of modernism. And remember, modernism is after the invention of the camera, when art really started to explode and the exploration of the artist. And I spend a lot of time talking about that with you guys. I'm just going to minimize my camera for a minute so you can really get a good look at that piece that I painted. And let's go ahead and click over and we'll take a look at some of these slides. And here's just a little bit of a closer image of the painting so you can see some of that detail work. And I really, a lot of people will mention to me that they feel like when I'm painting someone, that the eyes are just really dynamic and kind of bring in an introspection into the piece, as well as forcing the viewer to kind of interact with it, because I really spend a lot of time trying to make the eyes super alive. And that happens by really looking at the reflections, and hopefully that was successful here for you guys. All right, so probably his most famous piece ever is this piece, The Thinker, which we see as a huge sculpture, and it was modeled larger than life. And this is kind of a great quote by him. To the artist, there is never anything ugly in nature. And I definitely would agree with that. You know, nature itself, rotting wood, bird skeletons, you know, as you're walking through the woods, you find these things, and it's all just so beautiful, and it makes us feel connected. Even things that, you know, in nature might seem ugly or horrific, when you actually look at it, you know, almost everything has an element of beauty to it and complexity. So there we go. I think that's a great quote. So one of the things that's kind of ironic about this piece is it was included in, and I believe it was mainly sculpted, and I might be wrong on this, for the very top piece, I guess it's not the very top piece, I'll show you in a minute, of The Gates of Hell, which was a piece that took Rodin an extremely long time. It's a huge set of doors, which I'm not a huge fan of it because everything looks very simplified. I'm a big fan of his work when we see his life-size work, because there's just an element that it pulls you in, it helps you identify with it, and there's an element of connection between humanity when you look at his work. You feel the pressure of this body on this giant rock, and you feel the weight of the head on that chin. And it's also a piece about self-reflection and man contemplating his purpose in the universe. Hence The Thinker and The Gates of Hell, you know, the element of our religious connection to the universe. All right. So here's a frontal piece, really, really powerful sculpting in this. And one of the things I've mentioned is that in bronze work, and a lot of this work was cast into bronze. So you might be like, hey, how is The Thinker in Paris when The Thinker's in Philadelphia and The Thinker is in Pasadena? Because they're all over the place. Is there were multiple casts made of these pieces, and they were shipped all over the place and sold. So when you're looking at a cast in bronze, all of the surface work has actually been ground away and then retextured by expert foundry workers who are basically resculpting all of the detail in the work. And a lot of times it's just all lost. It's just all polished off. So sometimes the plaster cast of the clay is the most detailed remaining work that we have by the artist, because it was almost never fired. So clay work wasn't really considered real art. It was kind of considered just a raw material to get us to the precious metal of bronze. And if it was cast in plaster or cast or fired in clay, it was just kind of considered scrap materials. And to me, the most precious material is the clay, because you can actually see the work of the hands of the artist. And this, I believe, is a plaster cast of the clay. And you can normally tell because you'll see a lot of raw seams. Now, I'm not seeing that on this, but sometimes the plasters were then gone back in and cleaned up and made into very beautiful pieces. And it looks like there's a patina that was put on this one to make it look really great. I am seeing kind of on his forearm some lines that look like you would be casting it from the clay. All right, and here's The Gates of Hell on the left. And I think you can see my mouse here. No, you can't. But it's right below the three figures on the top. And the Thinker kind of crowns the top of this door. And then there's a lot of figures in torment and, you know, twisted poses all over the place. The figure on the right is a sculpture of Adam, which I believe is in the upper left figure at the top of the doorway. And to me, this Adam, more life-size, like we're seeing it here on the right, is just a breathtakingly beautiful piece, where even though it looks pretty great on the Gates of Hell. Scale dramatically changes how we see things. And to me, I want to see this piece life-size or larger. And I'm going to talk about something about that in a second with Rodin. Oh, that is not where we want to be. I don't even know how I did that. Okay. There's a nice wiki piece on him. By the way, wiki, pretty good for art history because it's not so controversial. Wiki's not good for issues about, like, is nuclear power a good idea? But when you're coming to art history, it's pretty great. So if you ever want to look up an artist, you can get a lot of information really quickly there, which is something I read whenever I do one of these presentations to make sure I don't misquote anything or get my dates right. Okay, not quite sure why that's happening. I'm going to pause and we'll fix out why my slideshow's not working. I'll be right back. Okay, I think I troubleshooted that. Sorry. Anyway, here's just another shot of the thinker. This is kind of how I'm used to looking at it in bronze because I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and there's one right at the Philadelphia Museum of Art towards the front. All right. On the right, you're also seeing what I believe is a plaster cast of an actual clay sculpture. I am a big fan of Rodin's portraits. And on the left here, you're not looking at a finished piece. You're looking at what is called a study. And a study is something an artist does in preparation for a piece. And you can see on the face on the left, right in that kind of the cheek, there's a big L shape, which was where the shims would be put in to make a cast out of the clay. And this was a study for a sculpture called the Burghers of Calais that is really well known by Rodin, which is a piece I believe I have in the slideshow that I will show you. I really love his portraits because I think they're incredibly expressive. Notice both of these have the eyes shut, and yet at the same time, they're so darn expressive. Let's go the right way here. Okay, I didn't want to miss anything. Just some other great pieces. One of the things I mentioned that I think is a really important thing about Rodin's work is he's capable of sculpting very little and really expressing quite a lot. Like the figure on the left, we don't have any arms, we don't have the lower torso. This is probably also a study, but I love this piece. I think it's great just as is. And same with the portrait on the right. This is a final portrait that you're looking at on the right. But notice clearly his hair didn't quite look like that. There's a rawness left to the shirt, and the detail that's there is really, I feel, all that's necessary. All right, I'm going to need to minimize myself for this one. Okay, this is the writer Balzac, and if you're looking on the left, that's actually the final piece that ended up being the portrait. In the center is a study, which is an incredible study cast in plaster, and on the far right was a nude that did not end up being the final piece. That was also a study. Notice the power in this man that he's conveying. And I remember my high school art teacher mentioned, this is not a man who, would have been an incredibly handsome man or someone that you would normally think of as a powerful figure, but his writing was incredibly powerful. And so we're really looking at how Rodin portrayed him to make this man look as powerful as his writing was, which I think he accomplished extremely well. We saw that one. Sorry, it's confusing as to which way to go sometimes. Okay. Camille Claudel was an artist that I also painted, and she is earlier in this series. And I included her here on the left as she apprenticed Rodin, which means she would actually help out in the studio. She also was a model, including for this piece, The Kiss. So she modeled for this piece, and she was also Rodin's mistress. And so a very sad story about her. I talk more about her in the video where I talk about why I painted her. I actually prefer her work to Rodin's. I think she's incredible. And some of this work of Rodin's is, I feel, some of his best. It's incredibly soft and beautiful, and there's gentle movement, hard to accomplish with big, weighty clay sculpture. When you're looking at a sculpture in marble, like the centerpiece that is the final piece of this, it's very rare that an artist grabs a hammer and chisel and starts chiseling away marble. They sculpt it in clay initially, get all the proportions the size they want, and then measure off the clay as they sculpt away the marble, because you can't make any mistakes. And that way you know exactly what you want, and you're literally just chiseling away and copying your piece. And sometimes apprentices would do a lot of this work because it was less artistic and more mechanical work. All right. We saw Balzac. Okay, another head from the Burghers of Calais. And some of these are gigantic, like not just life-size, but like double scale. And actually, LACMA, LA County Museum of Art in Los Angeles, has a few of the really huge ones of these. They used to be outside on public display. As they reopen LACMA, which I'm very eager to see happen, we should see that happening pretty soon, and hopefully these will be on display again. Okay, this sculpture got Rodin in a little bit of trouble, which it's kind of surprising looking at it now. But people felt like this sculpture was so realistic that he clearly had taken a real human body and either made a cast of it or taken a cadaver, a dead body, and encased it in plaster, burnt out the body, and cast it in bronze. And that technique is called surmoulage. I believe I'm saying it correctly. So this was a big controversy. People were like, Rodin, there's no way you sculpted that. It's way too realistic. And he had a really hard time convincing people that this did not happen. As a matter of fact, there was a whole inquest as to whether or not, kind of funny inquest, but people looking into it legally to find out whether or not he had done that. But an inquest is also normally has to do with a death. So I think that's kind of funny. So let's look at one of these other pieces. So here is another view of it. You're seeing the plaster cast here, as you can actually see where the shims were to separate this piece. But there is a lot of detail in this. Now, for that time, this was incredibly detailed. And you might think, well, how is Rodin a modern artist in the term of modernism? How is he deviating from reality? So one of the things is his simplification and changing of scale of things, and things being incredibly expressionistic. Even though he was not considered an expressionist, his work is full of emotion. And remember, most art before modernism was simply portraits of royalty or the rich, or things conveying religious ideas, or things conveying historical ideas. And some of Rodin's work crosses over into that, but it starts to pull away in its expressiveness, change of scale, and simplification. And you'll see that in his sculpture. But it's interesting because, the camera did not immediately make sculpture obsolete. Now with 3D printing and things, it is pretty obsolete in the sense of realism now. And I'm going to show you some realism that kind of takes this to a new level in just a second. But I think from this angle, I don't think you would go, hey, real person. But at this time, that's what people thought. So I'm just going to throw in this aside. There's an artist named Ron Muck. He did all the special effects in the film Labyrinth with David Bowie. I still have yet to see Labyrinth, but I've heard it's pretty unbearable to watch. But so much talk about that film, I still want to. But anyway, this guy makes insanely huge or insanely small, highly realistic human forms where he actually creates the clothes. He sews hair in. You can see him. This is actually Ron Muck on the left doing the hair of this giant sculpture. And it's just so creepily realistic. I just think it's kind of funny to think that we were thinking that Rodin must have cast a human body because this is so realistic, and now we're at the level of this. There's an artist named Dwayne Hansen that was doing this in the 70s. Ron Muck has taken this to an insane level, and even has like a newborn baby that is glistening with moisture and just creepy as heck. But he sculpts these in clay. These are not cast, and one of the reasons is because they're small or they're very large. So I think Rodin, believe it or not, in my sense, ushered in the age of the extreme change in scale, because one of the things he did, he sculpted this sculpture of John the Baptist shortly after this big controversy, might have been his very next piece, to show people, hey, I actually can sculpt at this level. And this is not just a cadaver that I've cast, and I did not do simulage to this, but it's actually sculpted. So the scale is quite large, and pretty realistic. One of his more realistic pieces. So I think this might be him really trying to show everybody just how realistically he could sculpt. All right. I'm not sure if Camille Claudel modeled for this one or not, but an incredibly beautiful piece. You can see it from different angles. Here you're looking at marble. You can see the marks in the marble. This one's actually, you can see some carving happening in the plaster. So this was most likely sculpted in clay, and it might have been just a straight plaster cast, or it might have actually gone back in, because you can sculpt plaster, but you can see some file marks and things on there, which I think is pretty cool. This is from the Burghers of Calais. We saw that head before. This is showing more of the whole piece here. And we are back to my big painting of Rodin. So why Rodin? Why is he important? Well, to me personally, seeing his work just really inspired me to make expressive, realistic, bold, loose, simplified sculpture. I think to art history at large, I think he really did usher in some of the extreme scale that we ended up seeing in portraiture down the line. Now, there's been large and small portraits, historically before modernism, but what Rodin did is kind of left the need for it to be super realistic and really went more for the expression, where the gesture is important and what I leave in and what I detail is important. He didn't deviate from naturalism too much, but we do see those elements that I pointed out in his work. And the Gates of Hell, even though it's not my favorite piece, some of the studies within that became some of the greatest sculptures in my mind of the human form, even to date. Rodin just did a lot of things to make it look incredibly effortless. And even kind of in a backwards way, working with Camille Claudel helped her career, even though it hindered it to a degree. She ended up living in an institution because she was so distraught with Rodin and other things in her life. But by him working with her, it gave her the access to the materials. It gave her the ability to make and cast some of the things she did. And to this day, now we are getting to know a little bit more about her kind of through the back door of Rodin. So thank you, Rodin, for making us aware of Camille Claudel, even though that was a little creepy, with the whole mistress thing. So anyway, this piece of mine is still available. I also have large G-clay prints of it. You can also get paper prints of it. And if you're interested in any of those things, you can follow the link to my website that I will post below. Please give me a thumbs up if you liked. I'd love for you to subscribe. I also teach beginning drawing, where you can learn to draw crazy realistically super fast. And if you would like to see a video of some of that, it's also, I will link that below as well. And I even have free lessons on my website so you can kind of try it out and see if that's something you would like to do. All right. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you at the next video. Bye-bye.